Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cabinet Conversations. My name is Erica Scott, and I'm the Artistic Programming Manager at Ford's Theater. If you are joining us for the first time, this is our live series exploring creativity, history, and leadership. You can learn more and explore our past programs by visiting our website at www.fords.org. At Ford's Theater, we explore the life and legacy of one of history's most revered figures, President Abraham Lincoln. His story is one of profound influence on our nation, but Lincoln's story is far from the full story. There are many elements and influences on the American experience, and we at Ford strive to highlight narratives that may have been left out or overlooked in the past. We do so on our stage, in our museum, on our website, and in this Cabinet Conversation series. On today's installment, aptly during Women's History Month, we'll explore the authentic lives and experiences of Black women who have been pioneers at the center of social and political movements from the Civil War era through suffrage and into today. Today, we welcome Professors Dr. Martha S. Jones and Dr. Tamika Nunley. Dr. Jones is a legal and cultural historian and author of Vanguard: How Black Women Broke Barriers, Won the Vote, and Insisted on Equality for All, which was selected as one of Time's 100 must-read books for 2020. Dr. Jones is the Society of Black Alumni Presidential Professor, Professor of History, and a professor at the SNF Agora Institute at Johns Hopkins University. Her writing also has been featured in the New York Times, Washington Post, USA Today, Politico, the Chronicle of Higher Education, and others. Dr. Nunley is Associate Professor of American History at Oberlin College and Conservatory. Her research and teaching interests include slavery, gender, 19th century legal history, digital history, and the American Civil War. At Oberlin, she created the History Design Lab, which allows students to develop scholarly projects in digital humanities, public history, creative nonfiction, and curatorial practices. Her new book, At the Threshold of Liberty, Women, Slavery, and Shifting Ideas in Washington, D.C., examines African American women's strategies of self-definition in the context of slavery, fugitivity, courts, schools, streets, and the government during the Civil War era. Welcome to you both. As a reminder to our viewers, we are taking your questions on social media platforms. Please feel free to submit those questions so that we can get them to our distinguished guests. All right, ladies, let's just jump right in. We're not going to cut any cards. I was having this conversation. I told Tamika I was going to recreate it once we got live. I think it is amazing that you both write the stories that we didn't grow up reading. I think about when I was in grade school many, many moons ago, they talked about African American women or the women that were prominent, you learned about Sojourner Truth and you learned about Harriet Tubman, and then it's like nobody else existed. So I want to ask this very important question to me personally. As Black women, why is it so important to highlight the lesser known change makers that are part of the larger American narrative? I'm going to start with you, Dr. Nunley.
Awesome. I love that question, and thank you for having me and creating this opportunity for me to speak with Dr. Jones as well. This question is really important, right? Because to not talk about African American women's history is to render them generically absent. And they were there. They were shaping the political climate of different historic moments. So much of our history is signposted by these events like the Civil War or certain political movements. And the fact of the matter is these women were very much a part of them, right? They were a part of the American story. And so when we are learning our history and we're learning about Black women, we're learning about the history of the nation as well, right? And so for them to be marginal or on the periphery really is just not reflective of what was happening at the time. And so I think I see what a lot of the work that we're doing is to begin to sort of seek out these women and find them. And what happens is in these books we do, and we find them in places where they are very much shaping the transformations of the time.
Dr. Jones?
I think Dr. Nunley put it very well. I would say, first and foremost, I didn't learn this history in school either. And I think going forward, even from this moment, if there are histories that we need, if there are histories that we want, there are histories that haven't been written, it is still on us, isn't it, to do the work and to write them. But I'll tell you very pointedly why I think this history is essential, certainly in 2021. Go back to August of 2020, when then Senator Kamala Harris accepted the Democratic nomination. She explained that her rise to power was a reflection of a thread of American political history that was embodied in 6 women. I'm just going to rattle them off: Mary Church Terrell, Ida B. Wells, Mary McLeod Bethune, Diane Nash, Fannie Lou Hamer, Constance Baker Motley. It was a quiz, people, in American political history. And if you don't know that thread of American political history, you cannot expect to engage with, to debate, to negotiate with, to understand the Vice President of the United States in 2021. So we all need this history in order to be the kinds of engaged folks that we want to be in our own time. For me, the history is, on its own terms, fascinating, but I think we need it as a tool in the 21st century.
Absolutely. What resources did you all use to put together the stories that you pulled? If you want to start, Dr. Jones, you can.
Sure. My book is a rather sweeping 200-year-long look at Black women's politics from, 1820 to 2020. And in order to do that, there are many possibilities. But for me, it was important to highlight that, in fact, Black women's history is right under our noses. 80 to 90% of the women who I've written about in this book have left a record. It might be their diaries or their letters. It might be their speeches or their newspaper columns. It might be their YouTube videos and more. And I think there is a misunderstanding that somehow Black women's history can't be done, can't be written, that the sources aren't there. And of course, as good historians, we will always lament what has been lost to time. But this is a book, the end notes of which are a roadmap to how you can read the speeches of Shirley Chisholm or of Mariah Stewart or of all the women in between. Black women left us a record, and part of our work, right, is to actually go out and recover it and make sense of it. But the record is there.
How about you, Dr. Nunley?
For my book, I think I'm in a very interesting position where the majority of my women in this book have not left records, right? And so I'm searching for them oftentimes in places that are not friendly places to look for Black women. And that could include the criminal court records or police precinct records, bills of sale of enslaved women being sold, fugitive slave ads, also more secretive records like vigilance records of abolitionists. And at times I'm fortunate where I'm able to find the Keckley's memoir, right, which does really illuminate what she thinks about the events of her time and her life in it. But really, most of my sources are from places where women are criminalized. They are subject to surveillance. They're subject to slavery. And so these records can oftentimes be tricky to deal with. And then in some ways, they're hidden in plain sight. And so looking at the letters of Dolly Madison, you'll find an enslaved woman named Suki who serves at her side for her whole life, and oftentimes very much in tension with Dolly in ways that complicate Dolly's persona and how we perceive her. So it really has been sort of a collection of a variety of different kinds of sources in order to put these stories together.
That's definitely something that we at Ford's are finding is, you know, the record may not have been blatant, but they're there. You just have to know how to interpret it, you know, and you have to know what you're looking for. It's definitely something that as we're trying to do better with our storytelling at Ford's, that we are involving ourselves in and making sure that we don't skim over things and that we look everywhere. Speaking of Ford's, we always try to tie our guests to Ford's Theater so that it makes sense why we have you on Cabinet Conversations. And I mean, Dr. Nunley, you have Elizabeth Keckley on the cover of your book. And Ford's has a walking tour that we used to do that is from Elizabeth Keckley's perspective. And we're actually, I may get in trouble for saying this, but I'm gonna say it anyway. We're trying to figure out how to bring it back. Like we're really, we think it's so important. Like we have this asset. We need to find the right women to put in place to do the tour. And hopefully when we are able to be back in person, we can bring Elizabeth back to Ford's. What can you tell us, Dr. Nunley, about her and the other Black women in DC, and like, how did they help to shape that era?
Absolutely. So Elizabeth Keckley is someone that I've worked with a lot in the past. She doesn't feature as prominently in the book as the cover kind of suggests, and that's kind of the dirty little secret of the cover. But Keckley is incredibly important to thinking about the creation of Black political activism in DC, particularly led by Black women, and also her social activism as well in the city. She was very active in her church. She was very active during the Civil War in helping to fundraise for refugees. And she was very much a socialite and really spoke a lot about her proximity to the Lincoln household, but used that connection and that network in order to help support the refugees that were coming in during the Civil War. And so she was very prominent in her own right, and also very active in kind of creating these organic Black autonomous institutions that have so shaped this vibrant free Black community in DC. But what makes her particularly special to the story that I tell is that she is a woman who was born into slavery. And so what this helps us to understand is just sort of the trajectory of Black women's lives, even though we have studied Black women in slavery, Black women in freedom, Black women as fugitives. Oftentimes their status is changing depending on how their lives are lived. And she is an example of that, right? Of someone who is an embodiment of those shifting identities. And she uses those opportunities to define life on her terms, the way she wants to be seen and perceived. And so she's very cognizant of the fact that she is a prominent Black leader in the community. And that's not lost on her. And she owns that. And I think that there's something to be said for us really taking seriously this kind of political work, but that's also sort of a representative work that she does for the White House as well.
Yeah, one of the most striking things that I found, like when I read her memoir from her own words, she knew that it was important that she was a businesswoman, and the difference between dressmaker and seamstress, and like how that sets you apart. And I think it's phenomenal. It is absolutely phenomenal. Dr. Jones, similarly, your work focuses on Baltimore. Did you see the same kind of impact of the women there? Or was it more, I don't know if you have the same feels, because there's often the Baltimore's Baltimore, Maryland and DC is separate, but I feel like there's this melting pot regardless across those areas. Did you see that similar?
Well, you know, I'm going to, if I could, I'm going to follow Dr. Nunley's lead, because I think for me, even in my work, certainly in Vanguard, Elizabeth Keckley is there kind of in the subtext, because, you know, one of the culmination moments in Vanguard is 1896 and the founding of the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs. Here, the establishment of what becomes really a profoundly influential organization of ultimately hundreds of thousands of Black women across the country. I think you can't understand that moment at the end of the 19th century if you don't understand Keckley, because Keckley, because she's positioned in Washington, is able to knit together Black women from across the country, yes, from Baltimore, but from Boston and from San Francisco. And she is creating this network of Black women's clubs that is ignited importantly to do the kind of relief work that is so urgent in Washington during the war, soldiers and refugees relief work that the government is not doing, the army is not doing. But those networks don't disappear with the war. In fact, they persist. And when Black women need to then organize in the face of the rise of Jim Crow, I don't know how you see it, Dr. Nunley, but I see them, you know, activating those networks and those sensibilities that Keckley really understood as urgent. And so I think she's somebody who very much deserves the cover of many books, and she's striking, and so she does enjoy that place in your book so importantly. But it is to say that her lifetime, her vision, her politics really resonate out for a very long time beyond her lifetime, in fact.
That absolutely is a great segue into this next question. Your work, Dr. Jones, talks so much about the combination of different issues and how these movements were successful despite that, you know, and how women were able to work together to get to a common ground, to get to a victory or not. Do you think, or is there evidence that women then found that as a struggle? Or was it just more of a, we are all fighting this common factor, and it doesn't matter if your lane is here or there, we're a 6-lane highway going the same direction? Do you think that that is evident?
Yeah, I think what you're getting at is the need to appreciate the Black women about whom we write as thinkers, right, as intellectuals, as well as doers, as activists and more, as workers, and all the other things that life demands of them. They are thinkers. They are architects of their own political philosophy. So one of the things I was interested in my book was, you know, how do we tell an origin story about what today we oftentimes rather casually invoke, this notion of intersectionality? Of course, it has an important origin story in the 1980s with scholars like Kimberly Crenshaw and Patricia Bell Scott. But long before that, right, at the beginning of the 19th century, Black women are sizing up their own position and the challenges that they face, the challenges that their communities face, and they need a point of view, a critique, a vision for where they come from and where they think they're headed. And that means that the foundation is that simultaneous critique of racism and sexism. So by the time we get to the end of the 19th century in the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs, for example, that is why Black women cannot step into suffrage politics and women's politics of that sort. It's too narrow a lane, right? It's too particular a lane because it doesn't permit them, for example, to work toward women's votes and at the same time work toward anti-lynching legislation, right? And Black women, you're right, of course, as you allude to, in some quarters are being asked to choose, are being told that some questions are legitimate or some questions fit and others don't. But as they build their own political culture, they're doing so very much from this sensibility that we come to call, I think, intersectionality in the 20th century.
Absolutely. Dr. Nunley, you use the language quest for liberty in your book when you're discussing the impetus of women. What or how did women wage these quests for liberty? So Dr. Jones has said intersectionality. Absolutely. That's one way. But what else would you offer as a quest?
Well, I think to Dr. Jones's point about Black women being the architects of their own political philosophy, I think that rings true in this instance as well. You have the beginning of the nation's capital, right at the beginning of the 19th century. It's a new republic, and this republic is supposed to reflect all of the possibilities, the egalitarian possibilities of liberty. And what Black women do in the Capitol, right, is that they actually test the limits of that. And so even though we have this political project that initially did not have them in mind, not as sort of arbiters of liberty, right, they are still forming their own political philosophies around what liberty looks like. And it is reconstituted and shaped and informed by so many of their experiences and their desires to live free and define life on their terms. And so this idea of liberty becomes one that is very specific to the woman that you're talking about. But then also there's some resonances when we think about movement building in the 19th century. And I'm thinking about Dr. Jones's earlier work, All Bound Up Together, right? That there are there's a public discourse around what Black women are advocating for. And so a lot of what my book does is kind of looks on the ground at the washerwomen, the cooks, the fugitives, the enslaved women, right? The ones who are serving alongside the political elite and who are articulating their own claims to liberty in ways that we might not always anticipate. And so this idea of liberty is something that is really centering the experiences and the possibilities of life for these Black women.
There's definitely no one set route, right? That's what I'm hearing from both of you and both of your work, that there is an end goal that we are working towards. And as long as you are taking those steps, you are taking steps in the right way. It doesn't matter if you are at the forefront or somebody in the support system. And I think that is absolutely important to notate and to say, because as we think about today and the fight that we are still trying to have today, even though it's different people, different players, same fight, you know, if you're feeling like you aren't doing enough, I'm hearing both of you say history has shown that every step counts and everything matters. And I think that is very important for our viewers to hear. I want to ask you all, because we're that intersection of history. And like I mentioned before, we really want to tell better stories. So is there a woman in your studies, be it she's in your book or not in your books, that you think people should, when they log off of Cabinet Conversations today, they should hop on Google and go research? If you can name one person. Dr. Jones, I'm going to start with you.
Oh gosh,
heavy question.
Well, I think because we're in the district, and I've got Elizabeth Keckley and her legacy on my mind, I'm going to invoke Mary Church Terrell. Why not?
Yes.
And I'm going to invoke Mary Church Terrell because she lives a remarkable life. That is to say, out of the crucible of slavery and into freedom. A graduate of Oberlin College, where Dr. Nunley is on the faculty today. Isn't that a beautiful coming together? Terrell is an educator who comes to Washington. And when I think of Terrell, I think there's no other city in the world, frankly, where she could have done what she winds up doing. She's very quickly not only an educator at the M Street School, but an activist and a leader in public education in Washington. But she is also there at that founding of the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs and will be its first president. She is a suffragist, probably one of the most committed, probably alongside Ida Wells, one of the most committed of African-American suffragists of her generation, someone who never cedes the question of women's political power to white women alone, even as those spaces are uncomfortable and at times unwelcoming. But her work is grounded very much in Black politics. She's also, of course, someone who is going to tour tirelessly to win federal, or to try and win federal anti-lynching legislation, as well as running this new fledgling Black women's political organization. Terrell is a woman of extraordinary talents and vision. I have a graduate student now, Mallory Pilat, who I'll give a shout out to, is working on, for example, her time in Europe, particularly in France, and the way in which Terrell had, in her own way, in the late 19th and early 20th century, an internationalist vision for Black American women that linked them to women across the globe. She's somebody who also needs a walking tour, if she doesn't already have one in Washington. And I volunteered to at least tag along on that one. And she has a brand new biography out that I highly recommend to folks. But a long life, a life well lived, and someone who really changes the national terrain for Black women and Black women's politics. And she does so right there from her home base in Washington.
She has a square. I don't know if people know, like, if you are downtown in front of Shakespeare Theater, there are plaques of prominent people, and Mary has a square down there, which is very cool. We're also working on a show about Marian Anderson, hopefully that we will be able to put on stage when we are back. And Mary is a feature in that play because she was integral to getting Marian Anderson to the Lincoln Memorial to sing that day. So absolutely worth it.
Brilliant.
Mika, Dr. Nunley, who do you have?
I would have Alethea Tanner. Alethea Browning Tanner was an enslaved woman who was able to sell her own goods at the marketplace in DC. And she ended up purchasing over, I think, 5 or 6 of her family members. She became one of the primary sources of funding for the first Black schools to be established in DC. And then she became a major donor for the establishment of Israel Bethel AME, and then also 15th Street Presbyterian. She was a founding member and also the second highest donor. And so she was this wonderful philanthropist that wasn't always sort of at the forefront of a lot of the sort of activism that we see, but she was kind of in the background, oftentimes providing the resources necessary for many of the Black autonomous institutions that are still standing today. And so I think, Googling her, and there's this lovely portrait of her at Moreland Spingarn, of her, and in her pictures in my book as well. And it's just this lovely rendering of her. And I'm always in awe of her. I'm still thinking about her even after having written the book. And so she's definitely worth researching.
Absolutely. That's amazing. We have had, I'm calling it a series because we've had several installments of Cabinet Conversations that talks about the Confederate monuments and the memorialization of certain people versus other people. And if you all could make a case for someone, it can be the same woman if it needs to be, but if you could make a case to bring down a monument and erect one of these fantastic Black women who absolutely deserve a spot on a pedestal, who would it be and why? Let's start with you, Dr. Nunley. I'm going back and forth at this point.
If I had to take someone from the book, I think it would actually be, I think it would be a rendering of a fugitive enslaved woman, an enslaved woman who decided to flee. And the reason why I say that is because DC was a very unique site in that its proximity to vigilance networks lent itself to Black women escaping with children and helping other people. And so if there was kind of like a fugitive woman, right, who featured in one of William Still's accounts, I think that would be really powerful, because those are some of the harder stories to tell. And I think that monuments really should commemorate, but also should be generative and spark really important conversations and dialogue about the history of a place. And I think that history of women's fugitivity and experiences in DC, which is a site of slavery for them, is a really important conversation to have, right? And so, and it also really kind of complicates who we think escapes slavery, right? So much of the scholarship around fugitivity is centered around men because many of them are escaping from really long distances, right? But in the Upper South, that story is a little different, and women are still inclined to escape, even with ties to kin, right? And many of them, they escape and then come back and retrieve their kin, right? And so they maintain ties to the district, but also experience it as a site of slavery. And so that's kind of my generic answer because I don't want to pinpoint one person.
That's fine.
I do think that a monument to Mary Church Terrell is long overdue. So.
Well, thank you for saying that, so I didn't have to, Dr. Nunley. I'm gonna, and I love this conversation because I think that it's really, I hope it's giving a sense to folks of the extraordinary kind of breadth and the range of terrain that we cover today under the broad umbrella of Black women's history. And so I appreciate this back and forth so much. But I'm going to take a stab at your question by actually invoking an example, a real life example that I hope folks know about, and I hope when they have the opportunity will see. We just have come through an anniversary year of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, the so-called Women's Suffrage Amendment. And in that, there's been a lot of rethinking of monuments, including in the Capitol. Now, we've paid a lot of attention to the Capitol of late, but I want to reframe that place to draw attention to the statuary collection. And within that collection, each state has the option, the possibility of including two tributes. And for a long time, the state of Florida, of the two, included a Confederate general who had been placed there early in the 20th century, much in the way in which many, many Confederate monuments were set in place there in the era of Jim Crow. But the state of Florida is taking down, or perhaps has taken down, and I haven't actually been able to follow this story as closely as I would like, but they were slated to take that monument down in February, and it may have been delayed because things have gotten a little more complicated in the Capitol. And it's being replaced with the figure of Mary McLeod Bethune. Mrs. Bethune is a Florida-based educator and suffragist who comes to Washington in the 1930s to found the National Council of Negro Women, who helps Franklin Roosevelt to establish and build his so-called Black cabinet, and brings dozens upon dozens of Black women to Washington in the wake of the New Deal to staff the federal agencies that are going to bring Black Americans out of the Depression. Bethune is somebody who brilliantly does an end run around the problem of disenfranchisement by using the power of patronage and the power of federal appointments to bring Black influence to Washington long before that can happen by way of an election day, certainly in her home state of Florida. So I'm thrilled that Mrs. Bethune is getting her due in the Capitol, and very much look forward to the time when we can all go back and pay her true tribute, because she is a great and someone who I think has been not yet gotten all of her due.
Absolutely. We have some questions from our audience, and this first one is meaty, to say the least. Given the overall male-dominated political and economic society of the time, did the women have to overcome limitations imposed by Black males impressing authority, in addition to the white-dominated authority and biases? Did you guys come across that in your research? Whoever would like to jump in first. I feel it from you, Dr. Jones. I feel you.
Well, I mean, because I think one of the things that distinguishes Black women's approach to politics is that by and large, they don't abandon the institutions that they share with men, right? Whether it's the church or it's an anti-slavery society in the early period, or it's a civil rights organization going forward. And so we would expect to find Black men and women in debate with one another about who women are and who they can be. And yes, and my book chronicles that, I think, most vividly in the story of Black churches like the AME and AME Zion churches, where women's politics takes the form of the quest for licenses to preach, for control of the missionary funds that they raise, for ordination to the ministry, and more. And in those denominations, Black men will split. And that's important to say, that Black men are not of one mind. But there is a deep question on the table about what is the true nature of Black institutions, right? Why do we have Black institutions? Is it because Black institutions embody and hold up and insist upon a set of very high ideals, which includes no racism and no sexism in America? Or do Black institutions need to be conservative and appear not too different from their white counterparts, because to do so might undermine them? At least in terms of the white gaze. That's a real debate. In the 19th century, that's a real debate in the 20th century. And so Vanguard is full of men, importantly, men as allies, men as partners, but men also who don't agree, are not of one mind about who women can and should be.
Dr. Nunley, do you have comment? It's okay if you don't.
It's hard to add to that, because it's, Dr. Jones is absolutely right. And, I work in the 19th century. And so those dynamics hold true. There is no one Black male, right? That there are Black male allies and collaborators, partners. And there are those, for whom patriarchy is really important, right? And very much a part of their own aspirations for freedom. And so, but what we see, right, in the lives of these women is that they really navigate this with a lot of ingenuity, and they know when they have a collaborative ally, but they also know when it's time to move beyond it, right, and beyond patriarchy, and have to act on behalf of their own interests. And I show that also with refugee women, right? There are times where many of their relationships have already been severed by the institution of slavery. So by the time we get to legal emancipation, they're trying to retrieve their children. They might find that their husbands have taken on another partner, right? Or realize that they don't want to set up home with those former partners. And so we see that actually the familial dynamics are actually a lot more fluid and very much shaped by the transformations of that time. And Black women, they navigate them in very sophisticated ways, I think, because the stakes are very different for them in different contexts. And so we definitely see that with the Civil War, but also to Dr. Jones's point, right, when organizing these Black autonomous institutions, we can see those gender politics at work in very complex ways, but there's not one way in which you see that working out.
Absolutely. We have a few more minutes left, and I don't want to leave. I said it at the top of the program, but I don't want to leave this program without acknowledging that you both, as Black women, have taken up the initiative, chosen a career in history, which you may have been shunned. I don't know. Like, people would be like, why that? You know? I want, if you can you please share any advice that you have for those who may be curious about considering a career in history, but feel like it's not the path that they're supposed to go because history has dictated that the people who tell the history don't look like us. Do you have any advice or anything that you want to share with those people? Dr. Jones?
One of the acknowledgments in my book is to the Association of Black Women's Historians. So for anyone who thinks that they're alone, feels like they're an outlier because history is your passion, because history is your calling, needs to come to our annual luncheon and join us and take not only inspiration, but I think take sustenance. I think the work we do is not easy. It's not easy in the way you allude to, because we are in a profession that doesn't always value our work or see it, right, in the ways that we see it. But it is difficult work because our subject matter is difficult. For this, I think that my view, the only way to do Black women's history is in community. Right? It is alongside one another. I remember the first time I met Dr. Nunley, and it was very special because there we were making a connection, you know, and knowing that it would be a connection that would remain with us for a very long time. And so I'm grateful to you, Erica, Scott, and everybody at Ford's Theater for bringing us together again, because this is the way we do the work. So, so I hope, you know, for folks who aspire, come and join us, you know, break bread, and have conversation and be encouraged, because I promise you will come away sure that that there is a path for you, and that it is a path worth taking.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think what has been beautiful about just even publicizing this book is just knowing the shoulders upon which I stand, that the field of Black women's history was created because Black women, you know, were able to become professional historians and produce this work. But the fact of the matter is Black women had been recording and keeping histories for well before, right, the professionalization of it as a discipline. And so I just see us as all a part of a broader genealogy, a tradition of doing this work and asking these really important questions of the archive of the past. And I find that I'm humbled by the fact that I get to do this work, because in my footnotes are all of Dr. Jones's books and all of the other Black women's books. And I find myself, you know, I was speaking with another mentor about this. We have like our special Black women's history shelf, and the shelf is getting bigger. It's really there. And I'm so excited about that. And whenever one of our books comes out, or we see the cover of one another's books is finally made available, we are cheering for each other. we are so thrilled for one another. And so we do this in kinship. We do this in community, and just celebrating the work and understanding the kind of labor and some of the hardships that come with doing this work. So we're there to encourage each other. So we want to see your work. We want to see you doing this history, and know that there's not one way to do Black women's history, right? So we're academics, but we need folks who are doing this work in historic preservation sites, in public history, and public programming in museums, writing books, right? Getting into our curriculum, our K through 12 curriculum for sure, right? And so you can do this work in various iterations, and just know that you have community in order to do it.
I am so glad that you both were able to join us for Cabinet Conversations today. I am fulfilled by this conversation. Honestly, I'm excited to see it happen. I'm excited that our viewers can see it happen. And I hope that you guys will come back when we call you. Because now you're part of the family. We're going to call you again for sure. I want to say thank you to you both. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We hope that you all at home enjoyed our conversation today with Drs. Jones and Dr. Nunley. We will continue to respond to your Facebook and Twitter comments and questions that we didn't get to during today's live session. And please consider making a financial gift to Ford's Theater to support our mission and the work. You can do so at fords.org/donate. We hope to see you again for our next Cabinet Conversation on April 8th. Until then, please stay safe, stay well, and I will see you next time.